Welcome to you all to the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. It's nice to see the room is filled and that you're eager to start with the discussion, the panel discussion we're going to have today. So, as I said, my name is Imme Scholz. I'm one of the two new co-presidents of the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung. We are here since spring 2022. And my areas of responsibility is the work we do in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia. I'm very pleased to continue our annual cooperation with the SLE with regard to the Development Policy Discussion Days. I consider these discussion days as an important contribution to the public debate on development policy and development cooperation. And some of you may know I come from, before joining the foundation, I was a deputy director at the German Development Institute. And our institutes used to compete a bit for postgraduates who want to work in development policy and development cooperation. But I always appreciated the development policy discussion days very much, because SLE occupied an important public space here in the capital with these topics. And we far away in Bonn didn't have that anymore. So I'm very happy to continue this tradition in my new role now here. And I'm also happy that EADI is part of this debate today, the European Association of Development Research and Training Institutes, because we also were a member of EADI or still are. I just went away. So welcome to you also here. This year we have 3 panels, as always, prepared by the participants of the SLE course. And the panels will debate 3 topics which challenge conventional forms, I think, of cooperation relations. The first one today will focus on the opportunities for green industrialization in Africa and the role of Germany based on green energy. The second one focuses on the tensions between human rights and nature protection in sub-Saharan Africa. And the third one discusses how far bilateral development cooperation can be an answer to the demands for reparation for the atrocities and genocide committed by Germans under their colonial rule in today's Namibia. All of them deserve your attention and interest, and I hope that the online meetings will count with many participants too. So regarding today's panel, let me just say a few words. Over the next 3 decades, the world will have to make a very radical transition to a post-fossil society. The quicker that happens, the better. We can see that this transformation process has clearly picked up speed, although it's nowhere near fast enough. But renewable energies have become very cheap and therefore competitive, which pushes the transformation of the global energy system. This may also have an impact on the global industrial landscape, where industries that are energy intensive locate, and on the comparative advantages of certain new industrial locations. Originally, as you all know, heavy industry or energy intensive industry was located close to the sources of fossil fuels here in Germany, especially coal mines. And our imagination is that in a post-fossil future, regions with a lot of wind and sun will undercut the production costs of traditional locations in the north, at least according to some studies. And the question is whether Africa could benefit from this development. It could be an opportunity for the continent that in the past has benefited the least from industrial development. But such a change will not happen on its own. Currently, our impression is that Germany sees Africa primarily as a source of green hydrogen and raw materials for its existing industry. This perspective would only prolong the current division of labor: energy resources in the north, energy resources in the south, industry in the north, and into the post-fossil age. And as we said, our interest actually would be to change that. So is there something else, something more creative that would actually open up work and development opportunities for the world's youngest continent, not in Earth terms, but in terms of population, which is an important resource also. So this is what we want to discuss today. And as foundation, we have already done some preliminary work on this topic with a comprehensive paper on the sustainable design of international trade in green hydrogen, which I recommend you to read. Jörg, you have contributed very much to this work and paper. So today we are looking at the next step, the opportunities of industrial development for Africa. And I'm sure that you will have an insightful and fruitful discussion. Unfortunately, I cannot stay for the whole event because I have another meeting following this. So, and I couldn't change that. So I'm sorry that I won't be able to be here for a long time. I would like to thank the SLA for the good cooperation, as always, the postgraduates of the current year for their commitment, and my colleagues at the foundation, above all, Elena Gnant, and the conference office for the preparation of the development policy discussion days. I wish you 2 insightful days of conversations, discussion, and now I would like to hand over to, is he here? Because I don't know you, Professor Markus Hanisch. Ah, there you are. The director of the SLE at Humboldt University for his welcome address. Happy to meet you.
Thank you very much for the nice words and the interesting briefing for this first in a series of 3 events of the Development Discussion Days. Thank you very much, Jörg Haas and Elena Glant, for organizing that with us. And thank you very much, Ime Scholz, for hosting us here today. This is the 23rd time that we can work here together. And I think already looking at the audience, this will be a very interesting and successful event, and I wish us well for that. What more could I say than the welcoming words of Ime and all the contents that she has raised so far? Well, let me say only one thing. The format this year is, again, an international format. We have fully switched to English, and we have a digital format to allow for access, for international access to the event, as we have done over the past 2 years. And I think this fits very well to the new things happening in our study program. Our study program has completely internationalized. This is the first cohort, the 63rd cohort, where we have a full international access to the study program. And we are very happy to have you here and brought you to the point where we can have an international development policy discussion day today. So thank you very much for hosting us here today. Thank you very much for the welcoming words, and from my side and from the Humboldt University, also a very warm welcome. Needless to say, this is the first in a series of 3. We have also very interesting topics that Ime has already raised tomorrow. Join us, stay with us, and I wish us well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hanisch and Dr. Scholz for the welcoming remarks. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone here, and thank you very much as well for the time that you've committed to this. On behalf of the entire team, I'm Isaac Seranga from SLE, and Francisca Ashron will be moderating this session with me. We have an exciting panel discussion for you with the topic Green Industrialization, Rethinking African-German Cooperation for Energy-Intensive Value Chains. Whether you're here to ask critical questions or just be part of the green revolution in terms of energy, I'm pretty sure you're going to have a great time. So you're welcome. I'm excited to introduce one of my other co-moderator or other moderator who will be doing our Q&A session. She's called Buju Dolanbai, seated right there. So before we start, I would like to give you the aim of our panel discussion. And the aim is to provide interesting and valuable information, as well as engage the audience with insights based on a collective mix of our panelist experiences within the field of green industrialization. So I'll go to the agenda, or what you expect in the next 2 hours or less than that. So first we are going to have technical information. Then we shall have an introduction video. It will be followed by introduction of our esteemed panelists. And then we shall have a core discussion that will be made out of 2 blocks. The first block looks at preconditions for green industrialization. The second block will focus on impacts and opportunities. And then after that, we shall have 30 minutes dedicated for Q&A for the audience. And lastly, we shall have networking and refreshments. Yeah, so Francisca, you're welcome.
All right, also a warm welcome from my side. Let's have a quick look at the technical remarks. Maybe you have noticed we will have a simultaneous translation from English into German. And later on, we will have a Q&A session. And I here especially would invite our digital audience to use the chat function in the Zoom room to ask questions. Please state your name, feel free to state your association and also the panelist you want to address your question. And you can also use the option thumbs up to highlight questions you're particularly interested in. That makes it easier for our team later on to pick the most relevant questions for you.
Before we dive into our panel discussion, we have a short video to set the stage. The video highlights the key challenges and themes that will be explored today, providing valuable context and insights, so enjoy.
Welcome to today's panel, Green Industrialization, Rethinking African-German Cooperation for Energy-Intensive Value Chains. In view of climate change, current economic paradigms need to be rethought. A path towards climate-neutral economies is being discussed under the heading of green transformation and industrialization. According to the definition of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, green industries are economies striving for a more sustainable pathway of growth by undertaking green public investments and implementing public policy initiatives. Greening of industry also includes improved industrial production processes and resource-efficient productivity. In our globalized world, international cooperation is highly relevant in this field as it can contribute to climate protection. The European Union has therefore adopted the European Green Deal. This is a package of policy initiatives which aims to set the EU on the path to a green transition, with the ultimate goal of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. Germany, as member of the European Union, has defined clear milestones for fulfilling the Green Deal. This includes reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 65% until 2030 compared to 1990 levels and achieving climate neutrality by 2045. The energy transition is also one of the targets. As the involvement of industry is highly relevant to achieving the targets, let's take a look at the example of steel. For contemporary infrastructure, it facilitates the construction of sustainable and resilient buildings, transportation, and energy networks. Steel is an alloy that consists largely of iron. As iron is mined as ore, it has to be processed in order to produce pig iron and later steel. This is usually done by putting carbon in the form of coke with iron ore into a blast furnace and melting it down. In this process, a lot of CO2 is released. According to the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection, steel production is currently responsible for about 1/8 of global CO2 emissions. In Germany, nearly 70% of exports comprise steel-intensive products, yet the country's steel production heavily relies on fossil fuels. Consequently, this significantly contributes to carbon emissions and environmental degradation. The import of green energy sources, for example in the form of hydrogen, from African countries is currently the subject of much debate. This is a narrow view that ignores further potentials for green industrialization in African countries. Regarding our example, one strategy for tackling global environmental concerns and promoting economic growth in African countries is to relocate specific segments of the steel and other energy-intensive value chains to African countries. These nations could leverage their competitive advantage in utilizing renewable energy sources, thus making energy-intensive production more sustainable. One option is a direct reduction plant that does not require coke and uses hydrogen, for instance. However, this requires a sufficiently high potential of renewable energy. As an example, Namibia has these prerequisites to produce green hydrogen using wind and solar energy. Germany is currently supporting the establishment of a green ironwork near Windhoek in Namibia. Green hydrogen is used to reduce iron ore, of which there are large deposits in Namibia, to iron in a climate-neutral way. This would also create green jobs, especially for the young and rapidly growing workforce, thereby decreasing global greenhouse gas emissions and operating costs for the entire sector. The production of green steel offers the opportunity to build a green industry in Namibia, but also to decarbonize downstream value chains, for example in the German steel industry. However, it also relies heavily on extractivism. Also, relocating parts of the German steel production to other countries can lead to trade-offs and implies a restructuring of an important industry sector in Germany with consequences on employment and local businesses. Considering the interests of the various stakeholders entails complex questions about opportunities and risks, which will be discussed in the panel.
So I hope you enjoyed our little video. And now I'm happy to welcome our three panelists. First of all, I'm pleased to introduce to you Mr. Rainer Barke. In 2022, he was appointed by Robert Habeck, the German Minister of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, as Special Envoy for the Climate-Energy Partnership with Namibia. Furthermore, Svenja Schulze, the German Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, appointed Mr. Barke as Germany's Special Envoy for the Just Energy Transition Partnership with South Africa. And furthermore, you have quite a long CV, very impressive by the way. He's also the Managing Director of Climate Neutrality Foundation in Berlin. Applause, please. Additionally, I'm excited to welcome Mr. Jack Kimani, who is joining us online from Kenya in Nairobi. So here he is. Welcome, Mr. Kimani. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Kimani is the founding CEO of the Climate Action Platform for Africa, which is a novel platform of initiatives focusing on climate action opportunities as drivers for economic growth in Africa. Please applaud him again. Furthermore, I'm delighted that Mrs. Maike Schulze joined us today. Since 2022, she has been a researcher at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, in short, SWP, in Berlin as well. The SWP is an independent policy advisory research institution, and Ms. Schulze belongs to the research division Africa and Middle East. Currently, she's involved in the project International Raw Material Cooperation for Sustainable and Resilient Supply Chains with a regional focus on Southern Africa. Please, let's have a warm applause for Ms. And one last welcome applause for all of our three panelists, please. Now I would like to give our panelists the opportunity to briefly describe their affiliation with our overall topic, green industrialization. Briefly meaning about 2 minutes, and it's all right, Rainer, I can call you Rainer, right? So Rainer, would you like to start? What is your personal affiliation with the overall topic, green industrialization?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Is the microphone on? Yeah? Thank you very much, Franziska and Isaac, and good afternoon, everybody. I would like to start by saying that the idea of producing green hydrogen in Namibia was not an idea of the German government. It was not an idea of any German industry. It was the sovereign decision of the Namibian government. In 2019, after the last election, which didn't go too well for the president, he said 30 years after liberalization, we need a new economic strategy to bring the country out of poverty. We have more than 50% unemployment among our young people, and we need a new sustainable strategy. And he asked the people from the private business community, 1 or 2 handful, to help him design that strategy. And this group of, like I said, 5 to 10 people, they looked at what do we have in Namibia. We have excellent sun conditions, we have excellent wind conditions, we have space, and the Europeans need the green molecules for their pathway to climate neutrality. And that's when they decided to come up with the idea of building a green hydrogen economy. I think it's very important at the very beginning to make that very clear. You know, I also listened to the wording of that, little nice video, relocating production. Well, nobody here decided to relocate production. It was Namibia who said, we want to build a green hydrogen economy, and I'm very happy that I can be part of this cooperation now, because we try to do that in a cooperative way, eye to eye, on the same level, making sure that there's benefit for Namibia and, of course, benefit also for Germany.
All right, thank you. I would love to give the word to our online panelists. Maybe we can see him again. Jack, I hope you can see and hear us as well. Could you go on? Where have you come across the topic green industrialization?
Yeah, thank you so very much. I want to start off by appreciating this conversation, because the conversation that is long overdue, if you ask me. I think part of the introduction, there was a mention of the organization that I had, the Climate Action Platform Africa, or CAP-A in short. And I will sort of give a background that informs on how green industrialization is a core part of what we're doing. So CAP-A is a public benefit organization, a system orchestrator that works to help unlock Africa's potential as a global hub for climate action. Now, we do this anchored on data, evidence, analytics that demonstrates Africa's unique opportunity to do 3 things: be able to meet its own growing demand for goods and services, but also help the rest of the world decarbonize the rest of the world's sort of industrial activity, but then removing carbon at a scale that we have not been able to do in the past. So those 3 things, Africa has unique comparative advantages that we feel enable it to achieve those items. And those are the solutions that the global community really requires if we are going to cause significant and meaningful change to the global climate crisis. Africa, for us, at least within the data that we have looked at, we feel it's able to deploy its abundant, available, untapped renewable energy potential on top of a young, dynamic, and growing workforce, in addition to its critical resources, critical mineral resources, natural assets. And when you combine all of this, and you think about the drivers, the cost drivers for these kind of solutions, then you're able to see why green industrialization in the context of Africa is not just an attractive proposition, is not just a great idea, is actually a financially viable solution. We have looked at, for instance, an analysis of what's the lowest cost system of wind and solar power with battery storage that is needed to provide reliable 24/7 power. And we have found that it costs 3 times as much in Germany as it does in Kenya, for instance, to produce that kind of a system. So if you're an investor looking where to deploy your industry, and you're provided with an opportunity where the cost will be 3 times less versus another location, then it's a no-brainer where the viability and why you should be locating that facility. So we believe green industrialization is an opportunity, and I think as the previous speaker spoke about, Rainer, it's not just something that Africa is seeking or asking for. The numbers, the economics dictate that as we strive towards getting to net zero, as we strive towards decarbonization, we have to consider how Africa can be a part of that equation.
And
I'm happy to share more.
We will do that in during our panel discussion. You already mentioned so many good points. Let us keep some of them for later. And for now, let's give the words to Maike Schulze. Maike, where did you touch upon green industrialization?
Thank you also from my side for the invitation to this panel. I hope I'm not talking too long by starting with telling a story of when I started at SWP. I think the project was planned in 2018 and was very much focused on sustainability of mineral supply chains. So we investigated the supply chain of copper from the Andean region and platinum from South Africa and Zimbabwe towards the European Union. Quite an interesting project, and everyone was talking about ESG and sustainability. And then, Russia's aggression against Ukraine happened, the pandemic happened, the US-Chinese rivalry increased, and now, security of supply was very much of a concern for the Europeans, for the US Americans and other industrialized nations, so the narrative changed in a way. And this is quite, this happened, and industrial policy apparently became had a revival both within the European Union but also in the US, and I think also in many African and other countries in Asia and Latin America. And while everything happened, the agency also of mineral-rich African countries, I think, increased quite a lot also on the international stage. And the questions of value add that were also a demand for so many centuries already, but came into the public domain again. And with this idea of value addition in the mineral sector, also the idea of leveraging mineral resources for green industrialization and other local value chains became a topic of concern. So also for my research that I'm quite happy to focus on now. I'm quite interested in how minerals relate to the idea of green industrialization and the establishment of new industrial value chains. And I'm very much focusing on the foreign policy dimension of it in my work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I give the word to Isaac.
I'll go directly to the first block that focuses on preconditions. This segment promises to be enlightening as we explore what needs to be set to ensure sustainable value chains through collaboration between Germany and African partner countries, leveraging the wealth of knowledge that you come with, Rainer. from being a special envoy to being a founding director of Agora Energy Vendor, to being so much into state-related business in terms of energy. How should the political environment in Germany and at EU level be shaped for green industrialization to thrive?
That's a difficult question. I'll try, because I think there are very different elements to the answer. First of all, I very much agree with what Jack said before about these fantastic conditions in several African countries. That is true. There is so much more sunlight and so much more wind than we can enjoy here in Europe, and especially in Germany. However, if you want somebody to invest into a big plant, may that be renewable energy, may it be renewable energy for producing green ammonia or green iron, you have to consider that there is also another component, and that is called cost of finance. I'm talking about the interest rates. Yeah? And the banker who sits somewhere in the industrialized world sees Namibia, oh, that's Africa, right away, twice the interest rate. And one additional point of interest rates means 4 or 5 additional points of cost of the product that actually comes out of that plant. So I think this is one of the biggest hurdles, that we have to develop instruments how to bring the cost of finance down in these countries that want to turn and build a green industrialized base. Yeah? Of course, there is a responsibility on the side of the host countries. They have to show that they are stable countries, that they don't change the policy after the next election, that they guarantee ownership, private ownership, that they are democracy, that they have rule of law and freedom of press. I think that's very important on that side. I think Namibia very much qualifies with these criteria. Many other African countries do not yet. Yeah? So there is a responsibility on the side of the host countries. But then, of course, there's also a responsibility on the side of the off-takers, those who have to buy these products. And at the end, of course, also on the responsibility of the governments to make sure with whatever instrument they have, may it be guarantees, may it be subsidies, to bring down the cost of finance. If we don't do that, I think all these fantastic conditions in Africa don't help. You will not see the investment.
Rainer, you hint on a very, very, very important point when you talk about the revenues and all that kind of stuff, and interest rates as well, and then the need for the host nations, for these mineral-rich nations to have the initial step. But then I would like you to give us a little bit of version of what needs to be in place for the European Union, or for Germany as a state, to create that environment where some of these resources that come at the very high level of the value chain could take advantage of the existing market.
Well, there's one instrument that Germany has developed, and that is more or less being copied now by the European Union. That's called H2 Global. H2 Global is a marketplace, and they define products. May that be now hydrogen. I mean, hydrogen you can only rationally, cost-effectively send through a pipeline. You cannot transport hydrogen by ship, because you would have to cool it down to minus 250 degrees. That's very close to the absolute minus point. It's so expensive, forget about that. But we're talking about hydrogen as long as we can deliver it via pipeline, and we're talking about derivatives, like, for example, green ammonia. And we're also talking about, and this was your example here, using hydrogen to reduce iron ore, take the oxygen out of the iron ore, and then send the reduced iron to off-takers in the north. So you're not transporting the hydrogen, but you're exporting a product that has been produced with green hydrogen. So what we have done here in Germany, we have created this instrument, H2 Global, which is a marketplace, which says who can deliver X amount of a product at the best price. So it's a tender process, and those who make the best offer get the deal. And on the other side, there's also tender process on the side of the off-takers. Who is willing to pay the highest price for this kind of a product? Now, ideally, these two come together, but at the beginning, we kind of expect that's not going to happen, so somebody has to cover the difference. And here in Germany, it's us, the German taxpayers, who are covering the difference. And the same thing is happening now. The system of European Hydrogen Bank is practically the same as the H2 Global system here in Germany. So then it's European taxpayer. That is a very, very important instrument to get the market going, because in many of these areas, we don't have market experience yet. And that is a problem for the off-takers as well as for the producers. If you don't know the price of your product yet, the value of the product that you buy or sell, then of course it's difficult to get the market going. So these kinds of instruments are very, very important to make the first step. After a while, I think we're going to have normal market conditions as in other areas as well. But to get the entire system going, this is absolutely key.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I would like to have Micah's perspective too on this. Micah, you're welcome.
I think I go back a few steps, if that is all right, from the very practical discussion to a more meta level analysis. I mean, first of all, I think minerals are quite interesting to look at. I mean, every mineral value chain is so different from each other. Copper is produced differently than platinum, than cobalt, than lithium. And each of these mineral supply chains looks also quite different and is rather complex, I would say, because they are like all the metals are used in so many different end products. I mean, our mobile phones contain so many different metals. It's quite interesting. So if you analyze and talk about shifts and opportunities and risks, it really depends also on the type of material we are talking about, even though mining in general poses a certain set of risks that are quite similar to each other. And what is also quite common is, I mean, first is also main topic of debate today, the use of energy. I mean, all of the production of minerals, mining as well as processing even more takes an amount of energy that is crazy. Sometimes it's like half of the energy production in one country. And the second structural characteristic that I find quite interesting is the geographical component, and I think now everyone is aware, but I think people weren't aware of that a couple of years ago, that mining mostly takes place in the so-called global south, with a lot of these materials being exported unprocessed, with a very little value addition taking place within the country. The refining, it really depends on the type of material set, but very often takes place in China. For a lot of the critical materials also we are talking about at the moment, and while the end production and the steps of the very like high value addition take place in Europe or some other highly industrialized countries. And this is something that needs to be changed if we want to build partnerships with African countries and other countries, I think in Latin America and Asia to a certain extent. And then the question comes in, what can the government or political level do about it to a certain extent? And maybe one last point is on the political dimension. I think Melanie Müller gave this introductory lecture this morning, and there's quite a debate on if this opens like the high demand at the moment for the set of critical minerals as well as the geopolitical competition around it. It leads to a lot of risks for producing countries, but also opens a window of opportunity, let's say, when there's quite a discussion on like if the opportunities apply more to a certain set of countries or if the risks are actually higher. And I think if Germany and as well as the European Union, and I think later on we will talk a bit more about the European Critical Raw Materials Act and the European Green Deal maybe, if they want to secure minerals and produce them sustainable. I mean, this is the aim for both production within the European Union, but also in third-party countries. Then there needs to be better collaboration on that front. As said, mineral value chains are extremely complex. I think it needs more, if we talk about sustainability, more transparency, I think better agreement on these standards and more implementation of sustainability standards. I think this is key.
Thank you very much for your views. And now I would like to look at an African viewpoint. Jack, Now, how would the political environment for Africa be set for this to thrive, or for green industrialization to thrive?
Yeah, thank you, Isaac. I want to echo some of what has already been shared by my colleagues on the panel in terms of some of the challenges we need to be confronting. And I know in a lot of instances, the question that you raised in terms of the enabling environment on the continent is a critical one. And part of that process in looking at how we can tackle that includes a number of different things. And let me touch on some of what CAP-A is doing, supporting the various governments and countries on the continent. And one of these involves an initiative that was launched in Dubai last year at COP28 by presidents from 8 African countries who came together with the COP presidency to address the issue of enabling a green industrialization in a systemic and integrated way. So they launched what is called the Africa Green Industrialization Initiative, AGII. And what AGII is looking to achieve is essentially to take green industrialization from a collection of individual projects, a collection of one project in a part of the continent versus another project in another corner of the continent, to an overarching organizing principle and approach that drives economic development and also resets Africa's position on the global stage through two things. One is accelerating the identification of what these opportunities are and the realization of those opportunities. But then the second item is driving the right policy and regulation, both locally and internationally. So it's thinking through how do you obviously send the right signals to investors at local level, but at an international level, also thinking about markets, because there's a lot of what will be produced, the low embedded emission products and services that will be produced within the continent through green industrialization. They also do need to have access to international markets. And we know that those international markets are not unrestricted. And Europe, for instance, is a leading innovator in this space in thinking about the carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM. And as you think about CBAM and the objectives of CBAM, how do you allow that Africa products produced on the continent, which should be very competitive, as they can be produced green from the very start? How do you allow that those products can be able to access the European markets, leveraging on the opportunity that CBAM provides? But this is where, in terms of the rules that are formed around CBAM, the exact metrics, compliance processes, how that is all put together is what will enable whether African goods and services, low embedded emissions goods and services could also be able to access, kind of those markets and be able to provide the kind of solution, not just globally, but also in growing the economies within the continent. So fair, equitable markets driven by high standards around climate rules and benefits is a critical piece of the puzzle. And of course, within the continent itself, being able to connect how these opportunities can drive some of the forward-leaning, some of the more investor-friendly and enabling environments from a policy, from a regulation standpoint. And I think the two being able to come together will certainly open up these opportunities. And just last one item, just tying back to what Raina mentioned in terms of how the continent is obviously perceived as a risky investment destination. Absolutely. And I think this makes a lot of otherwise viable solutions to end up being not viable, because the cost of capital ends up being extremely high. And I think some of the work we're doing, at the Climate Action Platform of Africa, is deconstructing the risk drivers, allowing that we can be very specific in terms of what are we attributing the risk that we ascribe to Africa. What are those risk drivers? And in some instances, debunking some of that, debunking some of the myths because there are some myths that are also relevant in this context. And then applying the right risk mitigation, thinking through some of the instruments that are available, from guarantees, fast loss capital, some offtake agreements, concessional finance. How do we bring all of this together to help avail the right amount and type of capital?
Jack, thank you very much for those points. You hinted on something that is very important, CBAM, or carbon border adjustment mechanism. For our audience, back to EU politics, the carbon border adjustment mechanism was launched by the European Union to achieve a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, as compared to the 1990 emission levels, and it will take effect by 2026. It's a carbon tariff on carbon-intensive products like steel, cement, and some electricity, which regulates the import to the EU. So I would like Rainer to weigh in here, and my question is that could the carbon border adjustment mechanism provide a win-win opportunity for African countries and Germany in the face of competitive low-carbon steel imports?
That is a very difficult question. And if you would ask the governments in the African continent, you will probably, from the majority, get a very negative reaction. And I explain why. Europe decided to become climate neutral. And one of our key instruments is the emission trading system, where we say whoever produces electricity or industrial products here in Europe, for every ton of CO2 has to participate in an auction and buy CO2 allowances. The price this morning was 72 euros per ton of CO2. And we have put a cap on these emissions, and this cap is being lowered every year. And 2039, it's going to cross the zero line. So after 2039, you cannot buy allowances. This means that the European industry has no alternative. They have to transform into a climate neutral way of producing goods. Now comes the the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because if we would not have introduced that, what would have happened? The European industry would have gone abroad and said, I have that very tough legislation here in Europe. I can evade it if I produce somewhere else. So every country, and I emphasize this because we in Europe have been the first ones, but the same discussion you have now in, for example, Australia, Japan, South Korea, everybody who goes climate neutral has to find a way how to evade this, leaving of the own industry to areas where you don't have a CO2 price. That's the background. Now, if you look at the perception from many African countries, and you just mentioned I'm active there in South Africa as well with the Just Energy Transition Partnership. South Africa is the biggest producer of electricity and energy from coal. And for them to have to pay these 72 euros per ton of CO2 that is in their products that they want to export, they look at that as a trade barrier. So your question was, is that an opportunity or is it something else? All those who want to hang on to fossil fuels look at this, of course, as a disadvantage because they have to pay the same price for the CO2 for the export products as if they would produce in Europe. It's actually nothing else but a level playing field. So you get in many, many parts of Africa a very negative reaction to the CBAM, but then at the same time you see that all the industries now that have to report, they are thinking about, oh, but we have these fantastic conditions here with wind and solar. Why don't we get wind and solar electricity? Because then we don't have to pay for the CO2 price in the CBAM decision. And this is exactly what Europe actually wanted. And then, of course, you have differences in countries like Namibia. they don't have, well, they have one coal generator that doesn't work 364 days of the year, but otherwise, there is nothing that they have to reduce. They can build new. For Namibia, the CBAM is a fantastic opportunity to participate in this global market now with very clean products that have practically zero CO2 content. It's more difficult for countries like South Africa because they have to organize this transformation away from very dirty coal energy to cleaner energy. But they have fantastic conditions. They are not so much worse than they are in Namibia. They're more or less on the same level. So this is a political debate right now that is happening on the African continent, and I very much hope that the majority of the countries chose at the end to go the way of Namibia, and many industries in South Africa and other parts as well, who see more the opportunities and not the disadvantages.
Talking about opportunities, I think it's the moment to look into the financial feasibility.
Yes, we talked so much about politics and finance. This word also fell a few times during our discussion, so I would like to pick it up. And Jack, for you, you worked over 20 years in the corporate finance sector and development. You operated basically all over the globe, Sub-Saharan Africa, North America, Southeast Asia. So I wanted to start with you. Who, how, and by whom could a more sustainable, for example, restructuring of the steel value chain, if you come back to that, be financed?
Yeah, thank you. If I could just quickly react to Rainer's points on CBAM as I get to the finance question quickly, I think there is just sort of quick points around Africa as the location where we do find the bulk untapped renewable energy potential, both in absolute and relative terms. You could argue there's inherent attractiveness. Now, most of the continent, and I like the example that Rainer gave in terms of South Africa and Namibia, most of the continent, most of the 54 countries do look more like Namibia as opposed to South Africa. Now, there are countries that, like South Africa, whose CBAM would sort of have negative effects because the transition they will need to make. But the vast majority of the countries within the continent will be able to see this huge benefit because they're able to go green from the start. They're able to respond to these new markets, and that new market opening up opportunities for investments in the green industrialization, in green industries that can enable that they drive towards tapping into this opportunity. Now, the devil is really in the details on this, and so I concur with that. It's a tough discussion to have because if Africa products are not included as part of what the CBAM rules that are forming, if those products are not captured with exact metrics and compliance processes that are included in CBAM, as well as acceptance or lack thereof of African reporting and systems, then you could find that that could lead to prohibitive entry barriers to these markets. Now, getting to finance in terms of the steel markets, I think the distinction between the fossil fuel energy generation and renewable energy is that renewable energy does need more upfront investments. And so you do require, as opposed to where the energy system that we are moving away from, you do require a significant amount of the investment upfront. And this is negated by that at the present, only less than 1%. I think it's about 0.6% of renewable energy investment is coming to the continent, to Africa. So even where there's advantages from perhaps green steel and opportunities around green steel, you find that the challenge of the lack of the financial flows makes it that it's difficult for Africa to be the green industrial powerhouse to the world, and thinking around what are the levers then we need to be considering. And some of those levers, I think you may attach a little bit on this, Francisco, is to do with capitalization of MDBs. the undercapitalization of the multilateral development banks today essentially means that most African countries are having to pay 5 times as much in terms of servicing their debt because of that undercapitalization. Because then they have to go and secure other debt, commercial debt, and that debt obviously being that much more expensive and undermining the viability of some of these opportunities. But I think also in considering how do we bring around some blended financing opportunities that help with de-risking some of these investments in allowing that they can be more attractive and in the long run, then perhaps being able to mitigate some of those risks to enable this to happen. But I think part of also the conversation is being able to demonstrate the end goal and the viability of some of these opportunities. We have looked at some of the numbers, for instance, when you talk about green steel. And if you were to process Africa's iron ore, the production that is currently in the market today, processing within the continent alone would help in saving up to 110 million tons of CO2 emissions per year. 110 million tons. It can also help in creating jobs in excess of 250,000 direct, indirect jobs, and then enabling that you're unlocking 20 gigawatts of anchor demand for renewable energy development. So I think part of this is also positioning the case in different ways, positioning the opportunity in different ways that then also gets the interest of the various stakeholders and allows that we can be able to drive these opportunities forward.
Yeah, allow me to pick up on that. You said stakeholders, and that is my keyword. I would love to forward a question to Maike, because I peeked in a few of your publications, and you are the expert, we already heard about that, in supply chains, in the mineral sector, and you also have written a few words about public-private alliances. And my question for you would be, could public-private partnerships or alliances at an international level provide a kind of financial boost which might be needed to kickstart this event?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, as you are used to, I take one step back, focusing or mentioning a few words on the European raw materials policy, because this exactly touches upon all of the topics that were just discussed. I mean, you've heard of it, I think this morning, the European Critical Raw Materials Act was proposed by the Commission early 2023 and just came into force last week. And the aim is to create resilient and sustainable mineral supply chains, and knowing that we cannot and will not produce all of these minerals within the European Union. One very important part also to diversify and de-risk from China are mineral partnerships with countries in Asia, Latin America, and all over the world, also on the African continent. And the Commission, in a way, promises to create partnerships that are mutually beneficial and support industrial value chains and localization of production in these countries. And it comes about implementation now. And this is, I think, the big question. And this is also where finance comes in. And I can touch upon a few of these points, and also public-private partnerships. Because unfortunately, there's no European raw materials fund. I think this was initially planned, but it didn't make it into law. So at the moment, the European Union very much relies on the Global Gateway initiative. Unfortunately, most of the money that was in the Global Gateway program until 27 is already used. Raw material sector was pushed into the program quite recently, so there's not so much money in there. Plus, now we have different raw material funds at national level. Germany proposed one and will be implemented, $1 billion. Then Italy as well as France. And the question now, all of these Global Gateway as well as the raw material funds rely on this idea of we have public finance, we de-risk certain projects with public money in a way, but hope then that companies will pick it up and join forces in order to make this change happen and diversify supply chains, have new production sites in countries also outside the European Union. And this is, I mean, connects to the points that my previous speakers made, that unfortunately a lot of European companies, not having mining companies ourselves, but we have a lot of automobile manufacturers, chemical industry, they're quite risk averse, particularly towards African countries, unfortunately, saying, yeah, it's such a risky environment. And the question is like how we can change this set of beliefs, behavior, but also how can we support them more with public money, but also other instruments like guarantee schemes and so on, that they see the opportunity of working closer with African partners and make projects happen, I would say. And I think there is a way for an opportunity for more public and private engagement, but it needs to happen. And I think in the mining sector itself, it's quite in the early stages of development. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that insight. Rainer, I see your wheels turning, so I would like to ask you now, what do you think? What role would the German Development Cooperation play in this regard? We can't leave the German cooperation out of our discussions, so could you also enlighten us with this part?
Well, I think the key to overcome underdevelopment and poverty and unemployment in African countries is industrialization. It's not agriculture and boreholes. That's also important. I'm not denying that. But if you look at what actually has happened, also very often with our financial support over the last decades, has not really solved the development problems in Africa. And that's why, initiatives like the one that the Namibian government started now a few years ago to build a green hydrogen economy really offers great opportunities. And if these projects, and I want to say a few more words about the two big key projects there, are going to be realized in the next years, I think this is going to have a significant impact on that country in terms of jobs, in terms of value creation, in terms of development. And that is absolutely key. And now let me say just a few words about these two key projects in Namibia. I mean, there are quite a few, and I cannot talk about all of them, but the biggest one is this green ammonia production, where the government of Namibia created a tender. They chose an area south of Lüderitz in the desert there, where there's mining activity right now, and they made a tender and asked international companies to come up with proposals. And luckily, a German company in cooperation with the South African company, Enatrag and Niklas Holding, which formed this company named Hyphen, they won that position of a preferred bidder. And then they negotiated over a couple of years, and now there's an implementation and feasibility agreement. The project is being developed, and hopefully, if everything goes well, around 2027, they're going to invest and then produce green ammonia. How do you produce green ammonia? Actually, it's not so complicated. You take desalinated water. You need water for the electrolyzer. You pump it into the desert. You have wind and solar plants, and take that water, and with the help of electricity, green electricity, you split the water in H2, that's hydrogen, and O, that's oxygen. And then you transport that hydrogen back to the coast, and you extract nitrogen from the air, and nitrogen and hydrogen makes ammonia. And ammonia you can ship by car. And this is a very, very important product for us here in Europe and in Germany. We were, until shortly before the war broke out, the biggest producer and consumer of ammonia. The main purpose is producing fertilizer, but it goes all the way over. It's a basic chemical of our chemical industry. Our chemical industry could not work without ammonia. So to make that ammonia green without CO2 emissions is absolutely key. So that is one project. And the other big project is the one that you mentioned here, where I first heard about this summer of 2022 when a German Namibian entrepreneur introduced this idea. At that point, it was not more than an idea to me in Windhoek, actually. And he said, we have developed a new system where we want to produce hydrogen also with renewable energy. And then we want to reduce iron ore to iron. So this is something that is happening in our big steel plants today here in Germany and in Europe and around the world. And you saw the huge amount of emissions, like 8% of the global emissions coming from steel production. Why is that? Because we are importing that iron ore, 50, 60, 70% from Brazil, from the rainforest, and the rest comes from Australia and Canada and Kiruna up in Sweden. So we import that iron ore, and then in these huge furnaces, like you see it, for example, at ThyssenKrupp in Duisburg, we use coal energy to get the oxygen out. Then you turn iron ore into iron, and then that iron you use at the end to produce steel products for cars, for microphones, tables, wind generators, whatever we need steel for. And it's a very key material. And the emissions are amazing. So what this company in Namibia now was thinking about was using a new technology. It's not this HBI that you had in the video. It's a new technology. It's something like a Drehrohrofen, a furnace, a turning furnace, where they produce hydrogen and then bring that iron ore together with the hydrogen, and hydrogen takes out that oxygen molecule from the iron ore, and then you have iron. And the beautiful thing is, H2 you put in there, O is being taken out of the iron. At the end you have water, and you can run the water in a cycle, so you don't need a desalination plant. So they can practically do that anywhere. They're not reliable on groundwater or desalinated water from the ocean. So when I heard about that, I was very excited about it. I went to the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action and helped get a financial support that Robert Habeck handed over to this company in December of 2022 when he visited Namibia. And they had the groundbreaking November 1st of last year, and they're going to start producing at the end of this year. So they do not have that problem of cost of finance that this ammonia project has, because the ammonia project has an investment volume that is equivalent to the gross national product of Namibia, yeah? Just to explain the dimension. This project here, producing green iron, starts smaller, 15,000 tons per year, but they're going to start producing at the end of this year with a new technology. And if that goes well, I think they can produce a product that doesn't need any subsidy. It's a question of how serious are we about putting a price on carbon. And we still have a lot of free allowances for our steel industry that, of course, these free allowances where they do not have to pay the CO2 price is, kind of a competitive advantage for the European industry. But I think in the long run, there's going to be a debate that we have to lead here in Germany, because we always, so far in this discussion, talking about the opportunities for Africa. But opportunities for Africa, value creation, jobs being created in Africa, also means that some of these jobs that are existing here in Germany today are going to leave the country. Yeah? We haven't talked about that. Now, fortunately, we do not have a problem with unemployment right now. We have a problem of not finding enough workers, but any transition has always winners and also losers. And we have to make sure that this transition is also a just one here. And if you look at what is happening at ThyssenKrupp right now in Duisburg, it's not because of this, it's because of other fears that the workers have there. We have to be very careful about this transition. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity for Namibia. They're going to start small. If it goes well, they can easily expand, because all you need is space. There's a lot of space in Namibia available. There's a lot of sunlight available. In the future, they will not only use PV, they will also use wind energy. And practically, you can do that in all parts of the country, because you do not rely on groundwater or on desalinated water. And that is the big opportunity of this, big advantage of this technology.
Thank you so much, Rainer. That was very insightful, also with the new projects going on. And I also want to throw a few numbers into the room. You mentioned the loss of jobs. According to last year's annual report by the Steel Association, 80,000 persons are working directly in the steel industry in Germany. So we'll probably have to face a few trade-offs, like you already mentioned, and Jack as well. So we have the job creation on the one side, but trade-offs on the other side. And we talked already a little bit about the social aspects, so I would like to give the words to my colleague Isaac again.
Thank you very much. We'll go right directly to the economic bit of it. From Rainer, you talked about the loss of jobs and all that, and everything that comes as a ripple effect as a result of transitions, whether in Africa or whether in Germany or at EU level. And my question goes right to you. What could be the economic interest for Germany in this kind of initiative that could outweigh its passive disadvantages?
Well, I'm going to give you my opinion to this. And that's debatable, of course, because there are quite a few people in Germany who look at this very, very differently. Yeah? If you talk to people from industry, if you talk to people also in the unions, and if you talk to politicians, very often you hear, well, we're going to go on this transition now to climate neutrality, but everything that is here has to stay here, and we have to subsidize it. I'm not so sure whether that's going to be a successful strategy, because we know that other countries have very competitive advantages over us when it comes, for example, to natural resources like wind and solar. Yeah? So taking these two examples that I just mentioned, producing green ammonia or producing green iron and importing that, in my opinion, is a prerequisite for us to have these industries here in the future. Yeah? If we try, with our conditions here, to produce all the green ammonia and all the green iron here in Germany, at the end, you're going to have a product that is so expensive that you cannot sell it on the global market. So it is very, very important that we look for opportunities to get these materials like green ammonia and green iron from countries that have better production capabilities as we have. So it's important that we cooperate with these countries. That's the reason why I'm in this project here, that we cooperate with these countries, because it's a fantastic opportunity for the African countries, but it's also a great opportunity for us at the end to have cheap, basic products that allow us at the end to keep the value creation of our chemical industry and our steel industry here in Germany and sell products at a competitive global price.
Well said. I'll pass it on to Jack. How could African countries profit from this kind of shift of value chains?
A number of different things. I think we have to start with the recognition of the opportunity, because I think the positioning for this opportunity is still not as apparent in a lot of African countries. I think they're still very much anchored in the whole aspect of victimhood, obviously having been disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. And so they will go to the international convenings, COP and other events, essentially seeking for how to be able to cope, how to adapt to the circumstances that they find themselves in. No issue with that. But I think it's to recognize that beyond that, there is this other bigger play, there's this other opportunity where African countries can be able to drive their own economic growth, riding on the opportunities that climate action provides for them, and allow that they not only help in providing a solution, obviously at a global scale, but this solution also then enabling that they can transform the economies in ways that achieve middle income status and beyond. But I think from sort of a philosophical standpoint, I think there has to be an acceptance, and I resonate with what Rainer said, there has to be an acceptance of how we achieve globally efficient solutions. Agreeing that activities being taken where they realize the most cost-effective climate and economic impact, it's the best way as a human population, as humanity, to allow us to collectively and most efficiently fight the existential threat of climate change. If we can be able to come around to agreeing on that and look at how then we seek these solutions in a collaborative way, but also in a cost-competitive way, in a climate impactful way, then I think we'll be able to realize there is a role for all of us to play, but also the realization of that a lot of these solutions, where they can be feasibly and viably delivered by the African countries, that's the opportunity that we have in front of us. And I think at a broader scale, we start thinking about geopolitical questions where you will minimize migration. You will start now at least addressing some of the concerns that European countries have in terms of, the concerns of, the migration patterns that are being witnessed today. And now you can enable the kind of economic prosperity within these countries. Then you also help in curing some of that at source.
Jack, thank you very much. Now I would go to Micah. In the morning, we had a very, very informative speech from Dr. Melanie. And she had a project that you both work on, or an issue that you both published about green transition and green mineral value chains, geopolitics, due diligence, regulation, and strategic partnerships. So based on your experience with that, what parts of the steel value chain or any energy-intensive value chain could be shifted from Germany to African countries?
Thank you for the question. I'm not so familiar with steel because I focus on other minerals, but I think I can make a few points. First of all, what is interesting about, mining at the moment and all the geopolitical setup and dynamics we talked about is that we are in kind of a dilemma at the moment because we need like new mines and new mining and more material or even if you have a circular approach, unfortunately at the moment, to sustain our industries, to produce the products that we need to produce green technologies for the energy transition and so on. On the other hand, mining is and remains a very risky business for human rights, for the environment. So the question is, if we have to mine, how can we do it as sustainable as possible? And this is quite a big task, actually. And I think this relates back to the previous question, like what role of development cooperation. I think in this field of risk mitigation, there is definitely a role for German and European development agencies to support countries in this risk mitigation, in this field of risk mitigation. First with research. Technology can't solve everything, but if we collaborate more and do more research, there's certain technologies that can reduce a certain amount of risk as well as decarbonize the industry. I think there's technical support needed also for the implementation of standards. Very often I hear that African countries wouldn't have any standards in mining, which is absolutely not true. Most of the countries have better mining codes than every European country. It's very often about implementation where more capacity is needing to have enough staff in the administration to go into the mines and observe and work on problems. And then the second part where I see definitely opportunity is in developing strategies, industry strategies that work for specific countries and specific value chains, because I see there and definitely an opportunity, and I agree also to what Rainer Barker said about having green steel production in Namibia would be great at the end of the day, and I think there are certain trade-offs, but there are definitely opportunities, but it needs to have, and African countries work on strategies themselves. There's the African mining vision in place, just recently, green African mineral strategy, industry strategies. I think there's a lot happening at the moment, and I think if we work together on both our industrial aims, there's a lot of opportunities inherent to it. And coming back to the question specifically on the mining value chain, I think, as I said earlier in my speech, it really depends on the specific type of mineral. I think in a lot of cases, producing or processing minerals closer to the mine makes a lot of sense for the country to have value add, but also for the environment, less transport costs, less CO2 emissions. But again, we have a lot of competitors, and at the end, it's a business decision as well, depending on, who's willing to invest, where is the business case. And I think if we work together on like developing the industry strategies and finding business cases that make sense for both sides, I think there's a way forward in that.
Thank you very much. So now we shall go a bit towards the environment. So Franziska, you're welcome.
Yeah, Isaac, thank you so much. But I have already asked so many questions today, and we would rather keep our promise to the audience and come to the Q&A part. So please, Burcu, come to our stage. Please, applause for my dear SLE colleague.
Thank you, Franziska and Isaac, for this introduction to the QA session. So participation from all attendees, both in the room and also from the online Zoom chat, is critical to shaping the direction of our discussion. And also we will delve deeper into the topic with your questions. So to accommodate both of our participants in Zoom and also here, we will take questions from both of you. So for the online participants, please feel free to post your questions in the Zoom chat. My colleague Kaya will check your questions and share them with us. And the participants in the room, please raise your hand if you have any question. And don't forget to state your name, your affiliation, and also the panelist you would like to address your questions. So let's make this Q&A session interesting and fruitful for everyone. And now it's time to open our discussion. Is there already a question in the room? We have many questions. I think, okay.
Hello, thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear all the panelists. My name is Rishikesh and I'm doing my PhD in energy transition. And my question is to Rainer. Do you think that green hydrogen is the single silver bullet solution to do the green hydrogen is the single silver bullet solution to do the green revolution for the decarbonization of the steel industry? Because I did my master thesis in steel industry transition, and I also went to visit Duisburg for see what's happening, and also took so many interviews with different stakeholders like politicians and investment and social workers, and I heard that from that perspective, green hydrogen is not the only single solution, and Germany is putting like they are betting on hydrogen a lot, and I think direct electrification is also one of the solutions as stated in the IRENA project, because in the 2050 I think around 64% is likely to be considered as a direct electrification that also need to be considered. So what's your thought on this?
We were the ones as Climate Neutrality Foundation, together with Agora Energiewende, which I founded 2012, who came up with the proposal actually how Germany could be decarbonized down to zero. And we first did 2050, November 2021, and then we came up with 2045. So I have a pretty good understanding how this transition can actually be successful. And I very much agree with what you said. The first priority is always direct electrification. Electrify everything directly that you can. I mean, first priority is efficiency, but then comes direct electrification. Yeah? But then there's simply certain areas where the direct electrification doesn't work. But that's also electrification because it's indirect electrification, taking green energy from wind and solar and other sources and producing the green molecules for those areas where the direct electrification doesn't work. And of course, we should recycle steel. No question about it, as much as we can. We should not export old cars, we should dismantle them, recycle them, and build new ones with them. And there are certain technologies that work with direct electrification also in the steel manufacturing, no question. But the raw material that you need, the iron ore, contains this oxygen. And with direct electrification, you cannot get that oxygen out of the iron ore. So I'm talking about the first step, taking iron ore and making iron out of it. Iron is iron ore without the oxygen. And I don't know any alternative but to use hydrogen. I mean, what we are trying to do here now in Germany is a very different technology. It's this DRA technology, you know, where you start with natural gas and then you switch over to hydrogen once you have that. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the Namibian project. That's a different kind of technology that I explained before. Yeah? It's actually much simpler and thereby also more efficient and thereby also cheaper. And in the long run, I think if that works, if that proves to be what it actually is supposed to be, then that's going to be the prevailing strategy. Yeah? And I do not see that direct electrification can get that oxygen atom out of the iron ore, other than the two technologies that I just talked about.
Thank you very much, Rainer, for this insightful answer. So let's turn to our online part. Let's turn to our online participants right now. Do we have any questions from our online participants, Kaya?
Yes, so first of all, I would also like to thank you from the online participants. So not only the people here in the room were following your very interesting discussions, but also people online. And they are also sending questions. So I would like to bring up the question that Ben Adnan asked in the chat, and this is specifically for Maike, a question. A short introduction. So he is writing, we are increasingly finding that electromobility for greener industries is causing further new environmental damage. The batteries developed to date are both energy and material intensive to manufacture, and for the most part they cannot be recycled efficiently in an environmentally friendly manner. So he is asking the question, aren't we creating more problems without really solving old ones? And what might be better initiatives for that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, this is a very, very important point, the consumption of minerals, right? I mean, the demand increase is very much driven, I would say, by the green energy technologies, particularly electric vehicles, but it's not the only, the only product we need it for. This is also sometimes a misperception. I mean, it's very much driven the demand, but we need it for all our different value chains in Europe and our industries. But yeah, definitely, if we talk about mineral consumption, then we should also address the way we produce things in our industries. I think there's a lot of European action now, which I very favor, and in like developing products that can be easier recyclable, that are easier recyclable. I think this is very important because this is the good thing and the very big difference from fossil fuels to metals, that most of them are recyclable. I mean, unfortunately, the rates quite differ. I mean, having very high rates for copper already and aluminium, for example, very low rates for rare earth and other minerals. But I think this is the way to go to like have circularity at the end of the day. But until we can have circularity, there's the question of like we need more primary metals, unfortunately. But then, yeah, it's also a question on like what type of products are we consuming and producing. But this is not, unfortunately, not my question. To answer, panel.
Yes, perfect. So now we can turn back to our participants in the room. Philip, so we can come to the first row. We have one participant who wants to ask a question. So just a brief reminder. It would be great if we can keep the questions short as much as possible because we have limited time and we want to give the opportunity to ask questions as much as we can do, to many people as possible. Please.
Yeah, hello, I'm Jörg Haas. I'm here from the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. And I have a question to Jack Kimani. I mean, we were discussing a lot about, German consumption patterns, German Energiewende, energy transition, but actually this is about Africa. And so my question is, can Germany do something else than just source green hydrogen, green steel, green ammonia from Africa? The demand for new steel will be in Africa, not here. The demand for new stuff, for new industrial production will be in Africa because Africa's population is growing. So what can Germany do to help Africa industrialize for its own purposes and for its own needs? And what steps are possible to support subsequent industrial value creation beyond the pig iron, beyond the first step? So what is there possible and what can Germany do for this further value creation steps?
Yes, Mr. Kimani, please go on.
Yeah, very, very appropriate question. And I think the concern that you raise is a concern I think has been raised even within the continent in terms of are you just producing for consumption elsewhere, or could you also be looking at a market within the continent? And I think there are a number of different examples of how different regions of the world have industrialized, and some more relevant than others in terms of how African governments need to think about this. I think there's a sequencing that is needed with this. And that sequencing allows that, we start with primary processing. So when you have, you're able to process green hydrogen within the continent, and that allowing you to unlock some renewable energy capacity, and of course the benefits that come with that renewable energy base that also addresses some other issues from an energy access standpoint. There is nothing that prevents an African country, once you start doing primary processing, yes, producing green hydrogen, to moving up the value chain. Now you can start getting into other industries, and I think this is where international collaboration is needed, and thinking through what are those levers that we do need to be able to leveraging those levers to enable that some of those opportunities become distinctive. And I think some of this comes back to markets. Just that you can be able to have offtake agreements, and those offtake agreements then allowing that as you move up the value chain, even before, within Africa, there'll be the consumption aspect of it, but then allowing that the scale of the offtake also enables the viability of the investments that are needed. So those kind of arrangements, I think, will need to be considered. But then also, as we move along, to consider how some of the tools that are needed from a financing standpoint, because really at the core of it, you come back to the cost of capital. If the cost of capital remains what it is, then it negates a lot of these advantages for most African governments. But I think the whole sequence of starting off with the primary processing, whether that's primary processing from a green hydrogen and its derivatives, and how you can be able to apply that to produce green steel, produce green aluminium, and other different products, that primary processing sets the stage for a lot of other value addition up the value chain, and that then becoming a basis for even on a local consumption beyond just the production aspect of it.
Maike, do you want to make a comment on that? Please go on.
If this is all right. This is a very important question and very good that it was mentioned. And thanks for the very good explanation. I just wanted to add one point. This is also the idea, right, with the mineral sector. Most of the plans of the countries, if you talk about industrialization, is trying to link the mining sector, the mining itself, to value chains that are more value add, either in the downstream, in the upstream, but also horizontally. And energy is the basis for all of it. So the point is very well made of having this energy supply steady. You can start establishing other industrial sectors. And what I find interesting, and this also leads back to the question of batteries, For example, Zambia and DRC have a regional cooperation trying to localize a battery cluster, so-called, so producing batteries. And there, the question of like economics of scale and the question of like, do we use it domestically or only for export is quite relevant. Because, and I find this quite interesting that maybe it's not feasible at the moment to produce a battery, electric battery for cars within the region because the market is so small. But then people came up with, yeah, okay, but we use a lot of two-wheelers, so smaller motorcycles in the region. So why not producing batteries for these type of vehicles that can be consumed domestically and then start an industry that is also more applicable for the moment and export only a pre-product of the battery to the US or European market for vehicle production. So this is, I think, quite interesting to observe different ways of countries to take part in the global value chains. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from our attendees in the room? Yes, please. On the third row. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Josephine, and my question goes to Rainer. I don't know if I've pronounced your name well, but you propose industrialization for African economic growth. And my question is, do you think Africa has the preconditions conducive for these industrial takeoff?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think not everything is there, but everything can develop. Let me just refer to the last question and to the answer. Taking the example of Namibia, you don't start this transformation by building a highly complex chemical plant or a highly complex steel plant in Namibia. You start with producing the green products and then step by step develop a new industry from there. I mean, if you look at what we are here in Europe using the green ammonia for, we're using it to produce fertilizer. And then we're exporting the fertilizer to Africa. How much sense does that make? Yeah? It would make a lot more sense, first phase, to produce the green ammonia in Namibia, and then step by step develop the next phases of the industry and producing fertilizer from that green ammonia, of course, is the logical next development step. But then for that, of course, you also have to create the conditions. But you don't start, like I said, with the third step, you start with the first one. It's a long journey, but it can be successful. And the different African countries, of course, have different conditions. I mean, there are fertilizer plants, not in Namibia, but for example in Zimbabwe, but they work with fossil energies. And they do not have a CO2 price. So in order for these green products to succeed in the markets, of course, there also need to be some policy changes in these African countries. But I see a great opportunity, and I sure hope that they do not stop with the first step, but that they continue and step by step also create the next phases of the value chain.
Yes. Now we have more questions, more burning questions from our participants. I would like to... Do you still have a question? Would you like to ask? Mm-hmm. Please go on.
Yeah, my name is Helmut Asche, retired prof in development economics and whatnot. I have a very short question on, I suppose, to Jack, Rainer, and also to Mike, excuse me, in that order probably, on the acceptance of second and third best solutions on this way to green industrialization and green energy production in Africa. I mean, you presented fantastic first best quality innovative projects, but many African countries now turn to exploit, and this is my example, new gas riches, gas fields, mostly offshore, Mozambique, Tanzania, Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria would still also gain from making gas a product instead of flaring it. And in your view, how far is putting these new fields of gas into exploitation for energy and especially for electricity production as an intermediate or complementary step acceptable as well? It is obviously far more difficult and far more controversial, but is it acceptable? I take the example of Senegal because on a part-time basis, I'm also the GIZ team lead for a project on green industrial policy in Senegal. And they are about to put the field of the so-called Grand Tortoise off the Senegalese and Mauritanian coast to service. And here in Berlin, we have a controversy, also in green political quarters, on is that a good idea or not? Is it?
Thank you very much for this question. Since we have limited time, if you would like to address this question to one of the panelists, which one would you like to choose?
I'd be happy to answer that because I think it's a very, very important question. And I've listened to many African politicians who have a tendency to come and look at us from the global north and tell us, you don't tell us how we should develop. You guys became rich with the fossil fuels, now it's our turn. And we decide on this transition on our own priorities. And my answer is, of course, it's your country. It's not our decision. It's our shared responsibility when it comes to combating climate change, but it's your country and it's your decision. But then, if I have time, I add a second sentence and I say, when we built our industry in Europe, the fossil fuels were the cheapest source of energy. That's why we chose them. And that's why we built our industries. Unfortunately, we ruined the climate. That wasn't intended, but what happened? But that's not the point. If you look today at what is your cheapest source of energy, it's no longer fossil fuels. It's no longer fossil fuels. Especially in Africa, it's photovoltaic and it's wind. So, of course, you're free to choose the more expensive solution. I personally don't believe it makes much sense, but you can do it. And then there is the issue of Senegal and other countries who don't actually want to extract oil and gas for the domestic market, but they want to export it. And by the way, that's also true for Namibia. But it's not Namibia that is exploring, but it's European companies that are exploring 300 kilometers off the shore of Namibia, oil and gas, for European customers. So then it becomes very absurd if we would tell them, don't do that. Yeah? It's European companies that go there, have a license, and produce products that we consume here in our gas heaters, in our cars, et cetera, et cetera. The answer to that is we have to change our consumption pattern. That's up to us. And what I tell politicians in Namibia then is just watch out, that you don't get stuck with the stranded investment. Because Europe, so far, is serious about phasing out combustion engines, is serious about phasing oil and gas in the heating sector. And of course, this is going to have a significant impact on the demand. So if there is this investment into oil and gas exploration, just make sure that you don't get stuck with the follow-up costs and these companies leave and you have to pay for it. Watch out for that. But I always say, it's your decision. That's not for us to decide. I really think that we have to be very careful on that issue.
We have still time for one last burning questions.
Could I add to Rainer's response quickly?
Sure.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Raina said. I think definitely these countries have the prerogative to decide how they want to approach the resources within their borders. And there's an open question in terms of if you are finding this resource today, is there the risk of having a stranded asset by investing in that resource, understanding the cost curves of renewable energy and how aggressively they're coming down. But if you're already producing gas and selling, I would suggest that African countries adopt the Norwegian model. Norway is one of the greenest grids that you'll find, yet one of the highest exporters of fossil fuel. Not because this is something that we advocate as CAPE, but to the extent that you find value in being able to use the resources that you're generating from your fossil fuels to reinvest in this new energy mix, in a renewable energy setup that positions you strategically for the future. By all means, that is an approach that is way more palatable and an approach that will position you to not be able to find yourself with stranded assets with an energy mix that is not sustainable.
Yes, I believe we have time for one last burning question, right? Okay, perfect. You were raising your hand for a long time, so please go on. On the second row, yes.
Hello, I'm Bianca Dehnfeld. I'm here as consultant of KfW Development Bank. I have a question to Rainer. You are in favor of a strong state, of an active industrial policy, establishing long-term transformation and climate partnerships with African and other countries. And this is a good green strategy. But how politically stable can this be in a situation with changing majorities in Europe, in Germany? So is there a consensus beyond green hearts?
Not with everybody. Definitely not with everybody, but I mean, if we talk about the example of Namibia, I think the Namibian politicians have understood that stability is very important to generate that foreign investment. And unfortunately, they just had a situation where at the beginning of the year, the president, who was actually the initiator of this strategy, died from cancer. And within one day, they organized the entire transition to a new president. Fantastic. Many other countries in Africa would not have, also Europe, would not have managed to do that. And the candidates who are running for president now and the parties, I don't hear anybody who has any chance of becoming into a powerful position who is opposing this hydrogen strategy. Yeah? But it's not only us looking to Namibia or investors from Europe who look down to Namibia, it's also them looking in the other direction. What's happening on the European level when we have, is there going to be a change in direction? Is the Green Deal going to be dumped? Or are we going to continue to be serious about climate? And they also look at Germany. But, if you want a democracy, change must be possible. But we have to fight for majorities for the right policy in Africa and also, of course, here in Germany and in Europe.
Thank you very much. Now, before concluding our QA session, I would like to turn to our colleague Kaya to share us a question from the online participants.
Yes, there were many more questions online, so I had to choose one final one from Ana Moreno from Eberswalder University. I will address it to Maike Schulze, as your association is advising German policymakers, but is also consulting international partners. So the question is, which kind of global collaboration mechanisms are required to have fair relationships in this transition? For instance, any distributive tools or policies. So maybe you also had something that you told the German policymakers already.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very complicated question at the end. I mean, I think this is clear to everyone that there needs to be more collaboration looking concerning, I mean, access to minerals, mineral production, and so on, consumption patterns. And it's great to see that there's a lot happening at the international level already, despite all the geopolitical tensions happening. So I would quite be, I mean, positive to the extent that at UN level there's a new resource panel dealing with these questions. There's still a binding treaty process going on. There's OECD talking about it. I mean, there's a lot of risks. What I see, maybe I have to mention this as well. I think the biggest risk at the moment concerning geopolitical tension is that we Western countries talk to Western countries, and then Eastern countries talk to Eastern countries, and there's quite a division in also concerning standards, implementation, investment, and so on. But there's also, as said, the positive aspect of there's more collaboration needed, and I see more collaboration happening. And there's a lot of agreement also on the international sphere that ESG is important, that sustainability is important to move forward, because it also creates resilient supply chains that we all need for different types of technologies for the energy transition. So there's unfortunately no specific recommendation I can give, but I'm happy to see talks happening in the international sphere, and I'm happy to see that Germany as well as the European Union are still engaged multilaterally, even though there are some mistakes happening with unilateral measures as well being implemented. But yeah, there's engagement, so positive stance at the end.
Yes, now I would like to give the word to Franziska for her concluding remarks.
Thank you, Burcu, and thank you, Kaya, for the question and answer moderation. So our event is slowly coming to an end, and I would like to ask our panelists for their last statements, and I would like to start with Jack. So Jack, please sum up for us in one sentence, what is your final message to the audience?
Yeah, this has been quite an informative discussion and conversation. Thank you for enabling it to happen. What I would add as a parting shot is that there is a distinctive opportunity here for a collaboration that is mutually beneficial between Africa and Europe, or Africa and Germany. And I think the sooner we can start exploring how that can be of benefit to both sides and to both countries, I think the sooner that we can start realizing some of these benefits. And this is anchored on intrinsic advantages across each one of these regions, the intrinsic advantages from a renewable energy standpoint on the continent, the intrinsic advantages from a German standpoint in terms of market, technology, and other aspects. How do we bring all of this together in a way that is collaborative, in a way that it can be able to take these solutions forward? And I think we can be able to come at this without seeing sort of any side losing, but looking at the advantages and the benefits that would accrue from the relationship.
Thank you. I'll pass on the word to Rainer. Please share your insights with us.
Well, first of all, I very much agree with what Jack just said. Oh, I'm sorry. Jack, I said I very much agreed with what you just said. I think, you know, we're discussing these issues here because we have ruined the climate, and we are still continuing to ruin the climate, and we have to stop that. But in the process of doing that, I think there are some fantastic opportunities for Africa and also for us. And what is important now is that we move from theoretical discussions to actions on the ground. Make it really work and show that these opportunities really do exist, because that is what's going to convince people that this is the right pathway.
Thank you. And Maike, what should we remember from this event?
I think I just agree to what you have said. I mean, looking at the resource policy, I mean, what is positive, I would say, is that there's a move now from German policy to a European level, because I think if we want to make a difference globally, there can only be a European approach to it. And I think it's quite happy to see Team Europe coming together, but now it's about implementation, and this is what we have heard. I mean, now we promise a lot with mutually beneficial partnerships and win-win situations, but I think what our partners expect now is implementation and see concrete projects happening. And I think there's more I mean, a need for a better understanding of the priorities of partner countries and putting, finance and efforts into implementation. I think this is key. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our free speakers, and a big thank you also goes to the SLE. Let me mention here in particular Tina Walter, who also joined us in the last minutes. She was there for us, coordinating day and night, so big thank you to her. I would also love to thank you, EADI and HBS, for giving us this wonderful stage here this evening. And of course, I would also like you, dear audience, for staying with us basically this whole afternoon. And if you want to follow up on the topic, we recommend reading our briefing paper, which will be published soon. And of course, we also invite you again, I think it's for the second time today, to our 2 upcoming panel discussions. Later on, you will find the details for the panel discussions on the slide. We have the topics named again. Here they are. Thank you. That brings me also to my last thank you. Our technical team from the HBS, also you're doing such a great job managing it. So big thank you to the technical team as well. And one last favor I have to ask, dear audience. Could you please answer quickly our short survey? You can find a barcode somewhere here in the room. You can just scan it and go to the... It's such a magical thing. I just say things and it appears. I'm such a magician here. So here it is, our barcode. So please scan it, do the survey. And for our digital audience, there will be a link provided in the chat. I hope it also magically appears when I say it. Click on it, answer our few questions here. And afterwards, please feel free to use the opportunity to network and enjoy some refreshments. And thank you very much.